The teenager helped an elderly man carry a fridge, knowing he'd lose his job. The next morning, when a luxury car stopped at his door, he discovered someone had been watching everything. Marcus's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., and his hand shot out from under the thin blanket to silence it. The spring chill seeped through the crack under his window, making him shiver as he pulled on his worn jeans. His feet found their way into the old sneakers beside his bed, the ones with the holes he'd tried to patch with duct tape last week. "Marcus? You up?" His mother's tired voice carried through the wall. "Yeah, Mom. Getting ready now." He grabbed his backpack, the zipper stuck halfway like always. The kitchen light flickered as Marcus entered, revealing his mother already in her waitress uniform, dark circles under her eyes. She'd worked the late shift at the diner again. "You should get some sleep, Mom," Marcus said, pulling out a chair for her. "I got this." She smiled weakly. "Just wanted to make sure you ate something." Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed a plate of toast toward him. Marcus swallowed hard, watching her exhaustion. "I can make my own breakfast. You've been up all night." "Baby, she started, but her words dissolved into a yawn. "Bed. Now." Marcus guided her gently by the shoulders. "I promise I'll eat." Once she was in her room, Marcus quickly packed away the toast for later. The bills on the counter caught his eye, red stamps marking past, due across 3 of them. His stomach tightened. The grocery store job didn't pay much, but every dollar counted. The morning air bit at his face as he stepped outside. Their small house looked even shabbier in the early light, paint peeling from the siding like old sunburned skin. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was already struggling with her recycling bins. "Let me help you with that, Mrs. R," Marcus called out, jogging over. "Oh, Marcus, you're an angel," she said, stepping back as he lifted the heavy bin. "But won't you be late for work?" He checked his watch. 6:15 a.m. His shift started at 6:30. "I've got time," he lied, carrying the bin to the curb. "Such a good boy," Mrs. Rodriguez said, patting his arm. "Not like those other kids who just walk by with their phones all day." Marcus managed a quick smile before sprinting toward Main Street. His sneaker caught on a crack in the sidewalk, the duct tape finally giving way. "Come on, not today," he muttered, feeling the cold morning air on his toes through the new hole. The grocery store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus burst through the back door at 6:37 a.m. Mr. Peterson, the manager, stood by the time clock with his arms crossed. 7 minutes late, Marcus. "Again." "Sorry, Mr. Peterson. I was helping save it." Mr. Peterson raised his hand. "One more strike, and we'll have to let you go. Understand?" Marcus nodded, his chest tight. "Yes, sir. Get your apron on. Register 3 needs restocking." The morning crawled by in a blur of price checks and customer complaints. During his break, Marcus sat in the employee lounge, finally unwrapping his cold toast. His phone buzzed, a text from his mom. "Got called in for extra shift at the hotel. Won't be home until late. Love you." Marcus stared at the message, remembering the way his father used to send similar texts, each one stretching longer and longer until they stopped coming all together. 3 years had passed since then, but the memory still stung like a fresh cut. The afternoon bell at school rang sharply, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. He'd barely made it through his classes, the lack of sleep making everything fuzzy. As he walked through the hallway, a group of kids huddled around someone's phone, laughing. "Check out his shoes," one boy snickered, pointing at Marcus's feet. "Guess some people can't afford new ones." Marcus kept walking, his face burning. The hole in his shoe felt like it was growing with each step. Outside, the spring sun was setting earlier than usual. Marcus hurried home, knowing his evening shift at the store started in an hour. As he rounded the corner onto his street, he spotted old Mrs. Baker struggling with her groceries. His watch showed 5:15 p.m., 45 minutes until his shift. "Mrs. Baker, need some help?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Her face lit up. "Oh, Marcus, would you? These bags are so heavy today." 20 minutes later, after carrying 4 overstuffed bags up Mrs. Baker's steep front steps, Marcus rushed home. His muscles ached, but there wasn't time to rest. He quickly changed his shirt and grabbed an apple from the kitchen. Dinner would have to wait. The pile of bills on the counter seemed to have grown. Marcus paused, picking up the electric bill. The total made his stomach clench. $147.83 past due. His last paycheck had been $213, and most of that had gone to groceries and his mom's medicine. His phone buzzed again. Another text from his mom, taking extra night shift too. Sleep tight. Proud of you. Marcus stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the leak in the sink that they couldn't afford to fix. The house creaked around him, empty except for the weight of all the things that needed fixing, buying, or paying off. He glanced at his destroyed sneaker, then at the bills, then at his watch. 5:47 p.m. If he ran, he might make it to work on time. Marcus grabbed his name tag and headed for the door, his feet already aching. Tomorrow, he'd need to find more duct tape for his shoes. But for now, he had a shift to work, and every dollar counted. The sun disappeared behind the houses as Marcus locked up, leaving him alone with the growing shadows and the endless cycle of one more day, one more shift, one more bill to pay. Just like every other day in the life he was trying so hard to hold together. Marcus's legs felt like lead as he walked home from school the next afternoon. The morning shift at the grocery store, followed by 6 hours of classes, had drained what little energy he had left. His patched-up sneaker, now sporting fresh duct tape, squeaked with each step. His phone vibrated. Mr. Peterson's name flashed on the screen. "Marcus, I need you to come in early today." Sarah called in sick. He stopped walking, his throat tight. "Mr. Peterson, I just finished my morning shift a few hours ago. Do you want this job or not?" The manager's voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes, sir, but then be here in 30 minutes. The line went dead. Marcus looked at his watch. 3:47 p.m. His feet throbbed at the thought of another shift. As he turned the corner on a Cedar Street, he noticed a small crowd gathering near the old Victorian house at the end of the block. "Oh my God, he's going to hurt himself," a woman said, holding up her phone to record. Marcus walked closer, curious about what was drawing everyone's attention. Through the gaps between onlookers, he saw an elderly man in a blue vest struggling with what looked like a refrigerator delivery. The appliance teetered dangerously on a dolly at the bottom of his porch steps. "Someone should help him," a teenage girl said, never lowering her phone. The old man's arms shook as he tried to steady the refrigerator. His face was red with exertion, sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool spring air. Marcus checked his watch again. 3:52 p.m. Mr. Peterson's words echoed in his head. "One more strike, and we'll have to let you go." The elderly man took a shaky step backward, nearly losing his balance. Marcus's hand tightened around his backpack strap, remembering how his father had promised to help fix their own refrigerator before he left. That was the last promise he'd made, and broken. "Hey kids, maybe put down the phones and give him a hand?" A middle-aged woman suggested from the sidewalk, making no move to help herself. Marcus watched as the old man tried to pivot the dolly, his breathing becoming more labored. The refrigerator wobbled precariously. "Sir?" Marcus called out, taking a step forward. "Do you need—" His phone buzzed again. "Mr. Peterson, where are you?" Clock's ticking. Marcus looked at the elderly man, then at his phone, then back at the man. The crowd had grown larger, at least 15 people now, all with phones raised. Someone laughed as the old man almost lost his grip again. "Sir!" Marcus shouted, breaking into a run. "Wait, please, don't try to move it alone." The old man looked up, surprise and relief washing over his tired face. "Oh, thank heavens," he breathed out. "I was beginning to think I'd have to sleep out here with this thing." Marcus dropped his backpack on the grass. "I'm Marcus. Let me help you with that." "George Thompson," the old man said, offering a trembling hand. "But most folks around here just call me Mr. Thompson." As Marcus moved to take position on the other side of the refrigerator, he noticed a well-dressed man standing on the porch, watching silently. The man's expensive suit and stern expression made Marcus hesitate for a moment. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. And again. "Ready?" Marcus asked, gripping the dolly's handles. Mr. Thompson nodded, and together they began to tilt the refrigerator back. The crowd continued filming, their phones following every movement. Marcus heard someone whisper, "Isn't that the kid with the taped-up shoes?" The refrigerator was heavier than it looked. Marcus's muscles strained as they maneuvered it toward the first step. Sweat began to soak through his t-shirt. "Careful now," Mr. Thompson warned as they hit the first rise. "These old steps can be tricky." The man in the suit still hadn't moved from his spot on the porch. His eyes followed their every movement, but he made no offer to help. Marcus's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He knew without looking that Mr. Peterson was probably firing off angry messages. His shift would have started 5 minutes ago. "Need to rest a moment," Mr. Thompson panted, his face alarmingly red. They carefully settled the refrigerator back on a level ground. Marcus pulled out his phone to check the messages. "You're late. This is your final warning. Don't bother coming in if you're not here in 5 minutes. Your position will be terminated if you don't respond immediately." Marcus's hand shook as he stared at the screen. They needed his paycheck, the bills, his mom's extra shifts, the leaky sink. Everything depended on every dollar he could bring home. Mr. Thompson's breathing was still heavy, his hands trembling worse than before. The sun cast long shadows across the lawn as the afternoon wore on. "Sir," Marcus said, putting his phone away, "maybe we should try a different angle. And you should let me take more of the weight." "Oh, I couldn't ask you to." "Please," Marcus insisted, moving to the heavier end. "I want to help." The man on the porch shifted slightly, the first movement he'd made since Marcus arrived. Was that a smile playing at the corners of his mouth? Marcus's phone buzzed one final time. He knew what the message would say without looking. His job at the grocery store was probably gone now, but as he watched Mr. Thompson struggle to catch his breath, he couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. "Ready to try again?" Marcus asked, repositioning his hands on the dolly. Mr. Thompson nodded gratefully. "Ready, son?" Together, they faced the porch steps again, the crowd still filming, the sun sinking lower, and Marcus's phone finally falling silent in his pocket. Whatever came next, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The first step creaked under the weight of the refrigerator. Marcus's arms burned as he took on most of the load, trying to spare Mr. Thompson from the strain. "Easy now," Mr. Thompson said, his voice shaking. "These steps haven't seen much repair since my wife passed." The well-dressed man on the porch shifted his weight, checking an expensive watch. Still, he made no move to help. "Pivot slightly to the left," Marcus suggested, noticing how the dolly wheels caught on a loose board. "There's more solid wood there." They inched forward, the refrigerator threatening to slip with each movement. Sweat dripped into Marcus's eyes, but he couldn't spare a hand to wipe it away. "You know," Mr. Thompson said between labored breaths, "you remind me of my son when he was your age. Always ready to lend a hand." Marcus glanced at the man on the porch, wondering if that was the son in question. The man's face remained impassive, but his eyes never left them. The second step proved trickier. The refrigerator tilted dangerously to one side, and Marcus had to throw his whole body weight against it to prevent disaster. "Whoa," someone in the crowd gasped. More phones rose to capture the moment. "I've got it," Marcus assured Mr. Thompson, feeling the older man's grip weakening. "Just stay steady on your side." His phone had stopped buzzing, but Marcus could almost hear Mr. Peterson's voice. "Don't bother coming back." The thought made his stomach clench, but the sight of Mr. Thompson's trembling hands strengthened his resolve. "Perhaps," the old man wheezed, "we should take another break." They carefully stabilized the refrigerator on the second step. Marcus's t-shirt was soaked through, and his patched sneaker felt like it might give out completely any moment. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said quietly, "please let me handle most of the weight. I can see you're tired." The older man started to protest, but Marcus cut him off gently. "My mom always says there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered with a good heart." Mr. Thompson's eyes misted over. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Marcus agreed, positioning himself for better leverage. "She taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let others be strong for you." The man on the porch took 2 steps forward, the first real movement he'd made since Marcus arrived. His expression had changed slightly, something unreadable flickering across his features. The sun was sinking faster now, casting long shadows across the porch. Marcus knew his mother would be worried, not knowing where he was. But he couldn't leave now, not when they were so close. "Ready to try again?" he asked, gripping the dolly firmly. Mr. Thompson nodded, though his hands still shook. Together, they tackled the third step, then the fourth. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but a few determined phone wielders remained. Just as they reached the porch landing, disaster struck. The refrigerator caught on the top step, throwing them off balance. Marcus felt it starting to tip. "Look out!" someone screamed. In a split second, Marcus made a decision. He pushed Mr. Thompson gently but firmly back, taking the full weight of the tipping appliance himself. His muscles screamed in protest as he fought against gravity. The man in the suit took another step forward, his hand half raised, but Marcus had already managed to stabilize the refrigerator. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked Mr. Thompson, his voice strained from the effort. The old man nodded, clearly shaken. "Thanks to you, son. Thanks to you." They were on the porch now, but their challenge wasn't over. The front door seemed impossibly narrow, and the refrigerator looked wider than the opening. "We'll need to angle it," Marcus said, studying the doorway. "Maybe if we—" His voice caught as the refrigerator shifted again, wedging itself firmly in the doorframe. "Oh dear," Mr. Thompson sighed, wiping his forehead. "Perhaps we should have measured first." The few remaining spectators had lowered their phones, finally seeming to realize this wasn't entertainment, but a genuine struggle. The man in the suit had moved closer, now standing just a few feet away. Marcus's arms trembled from exhaustion, but his mind was racing. The refrigerator was stuck at an awkward angle, neither in nor out, and the sun was almost gone. "Mr. Thompson," he said slowly, "I think I have an idea, but you'll have to trust me." The older man smiled warmly. "Son, you've earned that trust 10 times over already." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. The man in the suit watched intently as Marcus began to explain his plan, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the porch, and the stuck refrigerator waiting like a final test of their determination. "If we tilt it at exactly 45 degrees, Marcus explained, demonstrating with his hands, "the diagonal should just barely clear the doorframe." Mr. Thompson wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "You sound like my son when he's solving business problems." The man in the suit shifted his weight, and Marcus could have sworn he saw a hint of approval in his otherwise stern expression. "Okay, on 3, Marcus said, repositioning himself. 1, 2, 3. They lifted together, Marcus taking most of the weight as they carefully rotated the refrigerator. The metal scraped against the doorframe, making a sound that set Marcus's teeth on edge. Little more to the left. He guided, feeling sweat run down his back. "Almost there." Mr. Thompson's breathing had become worryingly labored. Marcus watched him with growing concern. "Sir, please let me handle this part," Marcus insisted. "You can guide me from the side." "Now, son, I can't let you, Mr. Thompson." Marcus cut in firmly but respectfully. "My mom works 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I know what exhaustion looks like. Please." The old man hesitated, then slowly released his grip on the refrigerator. "You're a wise young man, Marcus." Marcus adjusted his stance, taking the full weight. His muscles screamed in protest, but he kept his face neutral. "Just tell me if I'm about to hit anything expensive." The man in the suit had moved even closer, now standing just behind Mr. Thompson. His hand twitched slightly as Marcus struggled with the appliance, as if fighting the urge to help. "Careful of the doorbell fixture," Mr. Thompson warned as Marcus maneuvered the refrigerator through the tight space. The evening air had grown cooler, and Marcus's sweat-soaked shirt made him shiver. But he couldn't stop now. With a final push, the refrigerator cleared the doorframe. "We did it!" Mr. Thompson clapped his hands together. "Well done, my boy." "We're not quite finished," Marcus reminded him gently. "Still need to get it to the kitchen." The inside of the house was warm and smelled of old books and coffee. Family photos lined the walls, and Marcus caught glimpses of a younger Mr. Thompson with who he assumed was Mrs. Thompson. In several pictures, a boy in a suit stood between them, growing progressively older until he looked remarkably like the man who was now following them silently. The kitchen was at the end of a narrow hallway. More challenges. These old houses weren't built for modern appliances, Mr. Thompson sighed. Marcus studied the space. "We'll need to angle it again. Different approach this time." His phone had been silent for hours now. The grocery store would be closing soon, his job there definitely lost. His throat tightened at the thought of telling his mother. Focus, he muttered to himself. One problem at a time. The hallway proved to be an obstacle course of tight turns and precious photographs they couldn't risk damaging. Marcus moved with careful precision, treating each inch forward like a puzzle to be solved. "Watch the corner there," Mr. Thompson called out. "My late wife's favorite vase." "Got it," Marcus assured him, already adjusting his angle to avoid the delicate piece. The man in the suit had taken up position at the kitchen doorway, his eyes following Marcus's every movement. There was something calculating in his gaze now, as if he were taking mental notes. Finally, they reached the kitchen. The old refrigerator stood unplugged in the corner, waiting to be moved out. "Oh dear," Mr. Thompson said. "I hadn't thought about that part." Marcus wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "No problem. We'll need to move the new one slightly to the side, then tackle the old one. Young man, you've already done so much. I'm not leaving until the job's finished properly," Marcus stated firmly. "My dad, he used to leave things half done. I promised myself I'd never do that." Something flashed across the suit man's face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. The next hour passed in a blur of careful maneuvering, strategic planning, and controlled movements. Marcus's arms felt like they might fall off, but he maintained his focus. Mr. Thompson had been relegated to supervisor status, calling out warnings about various kitchen fixtures while Marcus did the heavy lifting. When the old refrigerator finally stood on the front porch and the new one hummed quietly in its place, Marcus allowed himself to lean against the counter, his legs shaking from exhaustion. "You must let me pay you," Mr. Thompson insisted, reaching for his wallet. Marcus straightened up immediately, shaking his head. "No, sir. This wasn't about money. But surely, you needed help. That's all there was to it." Marcus managed a tired smile. "Though if you're offering a glass of water, I wouldn't say no." Mr. Thompson's eyes crinkled with emotion as he hurried to get a glass. The man in the suit had moved to the kitchen doorway, his expression thoughtful. As Marcus sipped the cool water, he caught sight of the clock on the wall. 8:45 p.m. His mother would be frantic. "I should get home," he said, placing the empty glass in the sink. "My mom will be worried." Of course. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his hand extended. "Marcus, I can't thank you enough." Marcus shook the offered hand. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. The man in the suit spoke for the first time, his voice deep and measured. They stood and filmed. Marcus met his gaze for a moment, but said nothing. He gathered his backpack, now damp with evening dew from lying on the grass for hours. "Be careful walking home," Mr. Thompson called as Marcus headed for the door. "And Marcus?" "Yes, sir? You're welcome here anytime." The night air felt cool on Marcus's face as he stepped outside. Behind him, he heard the suit man's voice. "Father, we need to talk about that boy." Marcus walked home through the quiet streets, his muscles aching, his job gone, but his conscience clear. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, he had done what needed to be done. The porch light was on when Marcus finally reached home, his legs barely carrying him up the front steps. Before he could reach for the door, it swung open. Marcus James Williams. His mother stood in the doorway, still in her waitress uniform, her face a mixture of worry and relief. "Where have you been? I've called you at least 20 times. He pulled his phone from his pocket dead. "Mom, I'm sorry. I can explain." She pulled him inside, her hands checking him over for injuries like she used to do when he was smaller. "You better explain." "I called the grocery store, and they said—" She stopped, her eyes narrowing. "Marcus, what happened at work?" The kitchen light buzzed overhead as they sat at the small table. Marcus's muscles protested even this simple movement. "I lost the job," he said quietly, looking at his hands. "Mr. Peterson fired me for not showing up." "Not showing up? That's not like you at all. What happened?" Marcus told her everything about Mr. Thompson, the refrigerator, the crowd filming instead of helping. His mother's expression shifted as he spoke, moving from concern to understanding. "So, you chose to help this man instead of going to work? Mom, you should have seen him. He could barely stand, and nobody was doing anything." And she reached across the table and took his hand. "Baby, I'm not angry." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You're not? You lost your job because you were being the person I raised you to be. Her eyes were tired but proud. Though next time, maybe call your mama, so she doesn't think you've been kidnapped. He managed a weak laugh. Yes, sorry about that. His mother stood up, walking to the refrigerator, their old, humming one that barely kept things cold. Are you hungry? I saved you some dinner. Starving, Marcus admitted. But Mom, about the bills. She placed a plate of reheated pasta in front of him. We'll figure it out. We always do. As Marcus ate, his phone charged enough to turn on. Messages flooded in. From Mom, 7:14 p.m. Where are you? From Mom, 7:45 p.m. Marcus, please call me. From Mr. Peterson, 6:05 p.m. Your position has been terminated. From Mom, 8:30 p.m. I'm worried sick. Please come home. The last message was from an unknown number, sent just 20 minutes ago. Thank you for your help today. George Thompson. How did he get my numbers? Marcus wondered aloud. His mother was washing dishes, the leaky faucet adding its steady drip to the late-night quiet. Maybe he asked the grocery store? You said you'd work there? Marcus shook his head. No, they wouldn't give out employee information. And anyway, I'm not an employee anymore. The thought hit him fresh. No job meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant, Mom, the electric bill. We'll get paid, she finished firmly. I picked up some extra shifts at the hotel, but you're already working too hard. She dried her hands on a dish towel, turning to face him. Marcus, listen to me. You did the right thing today. The rest will work itself out, like it worked itself out when Dad left. The words came out before he could stop them. His mother's face softened. Come here. She pulled him into a hug, and for a moment, Marcus let himself feel like a little kid again, safe in his mother's arms despite everything. Your father left because he was weak, she said quietly. You stayed to help an old man today because you're strong. Don't ever confuse the two. The kitchen clock ticked past 10 p.m. Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Would you be available to stop by tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss. GT Mom? Marcus showed her the message. What do you think? She read it twice. Do you feel safe going back there? Marcus remembered Mr. Thompson's kindness and the strange man in the suit who had watched everything. Yeah, I do. Then it's your choice. She yawned, the long day catching up with her. But right now, bed. Both of us. As Marcus lay in his bed later, his muscles aching and his mind racing, he heard his mother on the phone in the kitchen. Yes, I can cover the morning shift. Yes, tomorrow too. No, that's not a problem. He pressed his pillow over his ears, but couldn't block out the sound of his mother taking on even more work to cover for his lost job. His phone lit up one more time. Son, I know you refused payment today, but please come by tomorrow at 10 a.m. My son would like to speak with you. George Thompson. Marcus stared at the message until his eyes grew heavy. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For now, despite everything, the lost job, the bills, his mother's extra shifts, Marcus fell asleep knowing he'd made the right choice. But in the quiet house, the leaky faucet kept its steady rhythm, counting out the cost of compassion one drop at a time. Morning came too quickly. Marcus woke to the sound of his mother leaving for her extra shift, the front door closing softly at 6 a.m. His muscles protested as he sat up, reminding him of yesterday's efforts. The kitchen felt empty without her there. A note sat on the counter next to a bowl of oatmeal. Eat breakfast. Meeting with Mr. Thompson at 10. Call me after. Love you. Mom. Marcus checked his phone. 7:13 a.m. Nearly 3 hours until the meeting. His usual morning routine felt strange without work or school to rush to. The house creaked around him, unusually quiet. The bowl of oatmeal had gone cold, but he ate it anyway. As he washed the dishes, the leaky faucet seemed louder than ever. Should have learned how to fix things from Dad before he left, Marcus muttered, then caught himself. No, don't go there. A knock at the door startled him. Through the window, he saw Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, struggling with a large box. Marcus, she called. Are you home? He opened the door quickly. Mrs. R., what are you doing with that? My grandson sent me one of those video doorbell things, she explained, the box wobbling in her arms. But these old hands, I can't manage the installation. Marcus glanced at his phone. 7:45 a.m. Plenty of time before his meeting. Let me help you with that. For the next hour, Marcus sat on Mrs. Rodriguez's porch, reading installation instructions and mounting the doorbell. His mind kept drifting to the upcoming meeting, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. There, he said, finally testing the doorbell. All set. Mrs. Rodriguez beamed. What do I owe you? Nothing, Marcus replied automatically. Just being neighborly. Her face grew serious. I heard about the grocery store. My nephew works there. Marcus looked down at his worn sneakers. News travels fast. You're a good boy, Marcus, she said softly. Better than that job deserved. He managed to smile. Thanks, Mrs. R. I should get ready for a meeting. Back home, Marcus stood in front of his closet, realizing he didn't own anything that matched the suit man's level of formality. He settled for his cleanest jeans and the one button-up shirt he had. His phone buzzed, looking forward to our meeting. GT, Marcus's stomach churned with nervous energy. What could Mr. Thompson's son want to discuss? Why all the mystery? At 9:45 a.m., he started the walk to Mr. Thompson's house. The spring morning had turned warm, and he wished he'd worn something lighter than the long-sleeved shirt. The old Victorian looked different in daylight. Yesterday's crowd was gone, replaced by the quiet of a residential morning. The new refrigerator box still sat on the porch, waiting for disposal. Before he could knock, the door opened. Mr. Thompson stood there, looking much more rested than yesterday. Marcus, right on time. Come in, come in. The house smelled of coffee and something baking. Marcus followed Mr. Thompson to the kitchen, where the new refrigerator hummed quietly in its place. Working perfectly, Mr. Thompson said proudly. Thanks to you. Sir, about your son. He's in the study. This way. They walked down a hallway lined with more family photos. Marcus noticed several showed the son in various business settings, shaking hands with important-looking people. The study door was open. Inside, the man in the suit sat behind a large desk, his presence somehow even more imposing in daylight. Marcus, he said, standing. Thank you for coming. I'm James Thompson. His handshake was firm, businesslike. Up close, Marcus could see the family resemblance to Mr. Thompson more clearly. Please sit. James gestured to a chair. Mr. Thompson squeezed Marcus's shoulder. I'll leave you two to talk. As the door closed behind him, Marcus felt suddenly very aware of his worn jeans and patched sneakers. So, James began, tell me about yourself. Marcus shifted in his chair. What would you like to know? Why did you help my father yesterday? The question caught Marcus off guard. He needed help. That's all? Even though it cost you your job? Marcus met James's gaze. Some things are more important than a job, sir. Something changed in James's expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. You know, James said, leaning back in his chair, I watched you yesterday. For 2 hours. I remember. Do you know why I didn't help? Marcus stayed silent. I was testing something. James stood, walking to the window. This town has changed since I was young. People don't help each other anymore. They film struggles instead of easing them. He turned back to Marcus. But you were different. Sir, I just did what anyone should have done. But they didn't. That's my point. James returned to his desk. I've been looking for someone like you. Marcus's heart beat faster. I don't understand. My company needs people with integrity, Marcus. People who do the right thing even when it costs them something. James pulled out a folder. How would you like a job? The world seemed to tilt slightly. A job? At Thompson Enterprises. Entry level, of course, but with real opportunity for growth. James slid a paper across the desk. The salary is significantly better than the grocery store. Marcus stared at the number on the page. It was more than he'd made in 3 months at his old job. But I'm just a kid, he protested. I don't have any experience. You have exactly the kind of experience I'm looking for. James's voice was firm. Character isn't taught in schools, Marcus. It's revealed in moments of choice. A car honked outside, making Marcus jump. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his mother checking in. I need to discuss this with my mom, he managed. James nodded. Of course. Take the paperwork home. Talk it over. But Marcus. Yes, sir? That kind of integrity? James gestured toward the kitchen, where the refrigerator incident had played out. That's more valuable to me than any degree or experience. Marcus stood on shaky legs, the folder clutched in his hands. As he reached the study door, James spoke again. Oh, and Marcus? The position includes a clothing allowance. For proper business attire. For the first time that morning, Marcus smiled. Thank you, sir. For everything. Outside, the spring sun had risen fully, warming the Victorians' weathered porch. Marcus sat on the steps for a moment, his mind spinning. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his mother. As he dialed her number, a sleek black car turned onto the street, moving slowly toward Mr. Thompson's house. Marcus watched it approach, the folder heavy with possibility in his lap. The darkness of yesterday seemed to be lifting, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like hope. The black car pulled up smoothly in front of Mr. Thompson's house, its tinted windows reflecting the late morning sun. Marcus clutched the folder tighter as the rear door opened. A woman in a crisp business suit emerged, her heels clicking against the pavement. She looked up at Marcus on the porch, then checked a tablet in her hand. Marcus Williams? Her voice was professional but warm. Yes, ma'am. I'm Sarah Chun, Mr. Thompson's assistant. She climbed the steps with practiced ease. He asked me to bring these over. She handed him another folder, thicker than the first. Employment paperwork if you're interested in the position. The front door opened behind them. James Thompson stood there, adjusting his tie. Ah, Sarah, perfect timing. Has Marcus had a chance to look everything over? I was just about to call my mom, Marcus said, holding up his phone. James nodded. Sarah, why don't you show Marcus the details while I handle some calls? Inside, Sarah led Marcus back to the kitchen. Mr. Thompson was there, arranging cookies on a plate. Thought you might be hungry, he said with a smile. Growing boys usually are. Sarah spread the paperwork across the kitchen table. The position is junior operations assistant. You'd start part-time until you finish school, then transition to full-time. Marcus stared at the documents, overwhelmed. I should really talk to my mother first. Of course, Sarah agreed. But let me explain the basics. The front door opened again. Hello? Marcus? His mother's voice. Marcus jumped up. Mom? How did you? Mrs. Rodriguez told me you were here. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her waitress uniform. Her eyes widened at the scene before her. The paperwork, Sarah in her business suit, Mr. Thompson with his cookies. Mrs. Williams. Mr. Thompson stepped forward. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? Marcus watched his mother take in the situation. Her shoulders straightened, chin lifting slightly, the pose she always took when dealing with authority figures. What's going on here? Sarah stood smoothly. Mrs. Williams, I'm Sarah Chun from Thompson Enterprises. We'd like to offer your son a position with our company. A position? His mother's voice was cautious. He's 14? Yes, ma'am. James Thompson entered the kitchen, his presence filling the room. That's partly why I wanted to discuss this with you personally. For the next hour, they sat around the kitchen table. James explained everything. How he'd watched Marcus help his father, the character he'd demonstrated, the opportunity he was offering. The starting salary is $15 per hour, Sarah added, pointing to a figure on one of the papers. With regular performance reviews and opportunities for raises, Marcus watched his mother's face carefully. She'd been quiet, listening, her waitress name tag catching the kitchen light. In his school, she asked finally. His education comes first? Absolutely, James agreed. We're proposing 15 hours per week during school terms, more during breaks if Marcus wishes. All scheduled around his classes. What exactly would he be doing? Sarah pulled out another document. Initially basic office work, filing, data entry, assisting various departments. But we'd train him in business operations, customer service, and computer systems. And the clothing allowance? His mother had spotted that detail. We provide all entry-level employees with a stipend for professional attire, Sarah explained. It's company policy. Marcus's mother reached for his hand under the table. He could feel hers trembling slightly. Could we have a moment, she asked. Just my son and me? Of course. James stood. Take all the time you need. Sarah, let's check on those reports. When they were alone, Mr. Thompson discreetly busied himself with the cookies, giving them privacy. Marcus, his mother whispered, are you sure about this? He squeezed her hand. Mom, it's more money than the grocery store. Better hours. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe I could learn enough to help with the bills better. Her eyes filled with tears. Baby, that's not your responsibility. But I want to help. And Mr. Thompson, both of them, they're good people. I can feel it. She wiped her eyes quickly as footsteps approached the kitchen. Mrs. Williams? James had returned. There's something else you should know. He sat down across from them. The position includes health insurance for employees and their immediate family. Marcus felt his mother's hand tighten on his. He knew she'd been stretching her prescriptions, taking half doses to make them last longer. When could he start? She asked, her voice steady despite the tears she was holding back. Monday, James suggested. Give him time to get some proper work clothes this weekend. Mr. Thompson appeared with fresh coffee. And perhaps a new pair of shoes? Marcus looked down at his duct-taped sneakers, blushing. Actually, Sarah added, returning to the kitchen, we have a company credit card for exactly this purpose. I could take Marcus and Mrs. Williams shopping this afternoon if you'd like. His mother straightened in her chair. That's very kind, but please, James interrupted gently. Consider it an investment in our newest employee. Marcus watched his mother's resistance fade. She'd worked so hard for so long, carrying everything alone. Mrs. Williams, Mr. Thompson said softly, sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let others help. Marcus recognized his own words from yesterday, reflected back at him. His mother must have heard something in the old man's tone, because she nodded slowly. All right, she said, but Marcus has final say. If at any point he wants to stop, of course, James agreed immediately. This is his choice. Marcus looked around the kitchen, at Sarah with her tablet of opportunities, at James Thompson, who saw something in him worth investing in, at Mr. Thompson, who started it all with a stuck refrigerator, and at his mother, finally letting someone else help shoulder their burdens. I want to do this, he said firmly. James smiled. Then let's get started. Outside, the spring sun had risen high, burning away the last shadows of doubt. A new chapter was beginning, written not in the language of loss and lack, but in the currency of compassion returned and kindness rewarded. Monday morning felt different. Marcus stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the collar of his new blue button-down shirt. The khakis still felt stiff, and the leather shoes pinched slightly, but he couldn't stop smiling at his reflection. Baby, his mother appeared in the doorway, already in her waitress uniform. You look so handsome. Marcus turned, suddenly self-conscious. The tie's giving me trouble. She stepped forward, her practiced hands making quick work of the simple blue tie Sarah had helped them choose. There. Perfect. The kitchen clock showed 7:30 a.m. James had arranged for a company car to pick Marcus up at 8 o'clock for his first day. Nervous? His mother asked, watching him push scrambled eggs around his plate. A little. He tugged at his collar. What if I mess up? Then you'll learn from it. She poured him more orange juice, a luxury they'd allowed themselves with the advance on his first paycheck. Just like you learned to tie that tie. A car horn sounded outside. Marcus's heart jumped. That's too early, he said, checking his phone. His mother peeked through the curtains. It's Mrs. Rodriguez. They opened the front door to find their elderly neighbor beaming on their porch, holding a small package. For your first day, she said, pressing it into Marcus's hands. My nephew helped me pick it out. Inside the box was a sleek metal travel mug. For all that coffee they drink in offices, Mrs. Rodriguez explained with a wink. At precisely 8 a.m., a black sedan pulled up outside. The same one from Saturday's shopping trip. Good morning, Marcus. Sarah stepped out, tablet in hand. Ready for day one? He hugged his mother quickly. I'll text you at lunch. Make us proud, baby. The car's interior smelled of leather and coffee. Sarah handed him an ID badge with his photo, taken during Saturday's whirlwind of preparations. First stop is HR for some paperwork, she explained as they drove. Then we'll get you set up at your desk. Marcus watched his neighborhood fade into the business district, familiar streets giving way to tall buildings and busy intersections. Thompson Enterprises occupied a modern glass building downtown. Marcus had passed it before, but never imagined he'd work there. Nervous? Sarah asked as they rode the elevator to the 12th floor. Is it that obvious? She smiled. I threw up before my first day here. The elevator opened to a bustling office. People in suits hurried past, carrying coffee cups and folders. Marcus clutched his new travel mug tighter. Marcus! James Thompson's voice carried across the space. Right on time, he approached them, shaking Marcus's hand firmly. Sarah, is everything ready? HR's expecting us. Then IT for computer setup. The morning passed in a blur of signatures, passwords, and introductions. Marcus's head spun with new names and faces. And this, Sarah said finally, is your desk. It was a small workspace near the operations team, but to Marcus it looked like a command center. A new computer hummed quietly, dual monitors glowing with promise. I had them set up your email, Sarah explained, showing him how to log in. And here's your training schedule for the week. Marcus stared at the schedule. Customer service basics, office systems, business communication. Overwhelming. He nodded. Take it 1 hour at a time, she advised. That's how we all started. At noon, James stopped by his desk. How's it going? Good, sir. Sarah's been helping me. James, he corrected. We're colleagues now. Marcus tried the name. Yes, James. Having lunch with the operations team? Actually, Marcus hesitated. I brought something from home. James smiled. Smart. Saving money already. The break room's this way. The break room had a view of the city. Marcus sat by the window, unwrapping the sandwich his mother had made. His phone buzzed with a text from her. How's it going? As he typed a reply, someone sat across from him. You're the refrigerator kid? Marcus looked up. A young woman in a blazer was watching him curiously. I'm sorry. My brother filmed you helping old Mr. Thompson. She extended her hand. I'm Lisa from accounting. Marcus shook her hand, unsure how to respond. That was really decent of you, she continued. Most people would have just walked by. I couldn't do that. That's exactly why you're here. James's voice came from the doorway. Lisa, is your team ready for the budget meeting? She jumped up. Yes, sir. Right away. After she left, James sat in her vacant seat. You'll get a lot of that at first. People knowing about the refrigerator. People knowing why you were hired. James leaned forward. Some might say it was just a random act of kindness. But I saw something more. Initiative, integrity, problem solving. Those aren't random. They're character. The afternoon brought more training, more faces, more information to absorb. By 5 o'clock, Marcus's head was full, and his new shoes had definitely given him blisters. Sarah appeared at his desk. Ready to head home? In the car, Marcus finally relaxed. Sarah, does it get easier? She smiled. The shoes? Yes. The work? Also yes. The desire to do the right thing, even when it's hard. She glanced at him in the rearview mirror. That seems to come naturally to you. His phone buzzed again. A text from Mr. Thompson. Stop by if you're not too tired. Want to hear about your first day? They pulled up to his house, just as his mother was leaving for her evening shift. How was it? She asked, hugging him tight. Marcus thought about the day. The new clothes, new faces, new responsibilities. The way people looked at him not with pity or judgment, but with respect. It was good, he said. Really good. Mr. Thompson invited me over, he added. Is it okay if I go? She smiled. Just don't stay too late. You have school tomorrow. Marcus watched her walk to her car. Her waitress uniform slightly faded but clean. Her head held high despite her exhaustion. Mom? She turned. I love you. Her smile lit up the early evening shadows. Love you too, baby. So proud of you. Marcus walked to Mr. Thompson's house, his new shoes clicking against the sidewalk. The refrigerator box was gone from the porch, but the memory of that choice, help or walk away, would stay with him forever. Inside, Mr. Thompson had coffee waiting. Tell me everything. So Marcus did. While the spring evening settled around them, and his tie gradually loosened and his blistered feet reminded him that new beginnings often come with their own kind of growing pains. But good pain, growing pain, the kind that meant something better was coming. 2 months later, Marcus stood in the grocery store, looking at his reflection in the glass of the frozen food section. His blue tie hung perfectly straight now. He'd mastered that skill weeks ago. The leather shoes, broken in and comfortable, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Can I help you find anything? A voice asked. Marcus turned to face a young employee, maybe 16, wearing the same green apron he used to wear. Actually, Marcus smiled. I'm here to see Mr. Peterson. The manager's office looked smaller than he remembered. Mr. Peterson glanced up from his desk, recognition flickering across his face. Marcus? Is that really you? Yes, sir. Marcus sat in the chair across from him. I wanted to talk about your training program. Mr. Peterson leaned back. Training program? For new employees, Marcus explained. Thompson Enterprises is interested in partnering with local businesses to provide job readiness training. We thought the grocery store would be a good place to start. The words flowed easily now. 2 months of business communication training had taught him well. Thompson Enterprises? Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose. You work for them now? Yes, sir. In operations. Marcus pulled out his business cards, still thrilling to see his name printed professionally. We're looking to create opportunities for young people who might need a second chance. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Outside the manager's office, the store continued its routine. A clerk called for a price check. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed. Life moved forward. Well, Mr. Peterson said finally, that's quite a change from stocking shelves. Marcus thought about the day everything had changed. The refrigerator, the choice, the consequences. Sometimes change finds us, he said. Sometimes we have to find it. The meeting lasted 30 minutes. When Marcus stood to leave, Mr. Peterson extended his hand. I'm sorry about how things ended, the manager said. But it seems like it worked out for the best. It did? Marcus shook his hand. And now maybe we can help it work out for others too. Back at the office, Sarah was waiting at his desk. How did it go? He's interested. Marcus loosened his tie slightly. Said he'll discuss it with corporate. James appeared behind them. Good work. That's 3 local businesses this week. Marcus's computer showed several unread emails and a reminder about tomorrow's training session. He'd be helping teach new employees about the company's systems. A role reversal that still felt surreal. Oh, Sarah added, your mother called. Asked if you could stop by Mr. Thompson's on your way home. The old Victorian looked different these days. The paint had been refreshed, the steps repaired. Marcus's first project bonus had gone toward hiring professionals to fix Mr. Thompson's porch, despite the old man's protests. Marcus! Mr. Thompson called from his garden. Come see what James brought me. A sleek new lawn mower stood in the driveway. Mr. Thompson beamed like a child with a new toy. No more struggling with that old push mower, he said proudly. Need help learning how it works? Marcus offered. They spent the next hour going over the mower's features. Marcus had learned that sometimes helping meant stepping back and letting someone do things themselves. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. Dinner's ready when you are. Big news to share. Got to run, Marcus told Mr. Thompson. Mom's waiting. Of course, of course. Oh. And Marcus? Yes, sir. Thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. That refrigerator was the best thing that ever got stuck in my doorway. Marcus laughed. Same here, Mr. Thompson. Same here. Holmes smelled of his mother's cooking. She was already in her waitress uniform, but something was different. She was practically glowing. Guess what? She burst out before he could even set down his briefcase. The hotel offered me a management position. Marcus hugged her tight. Mom, that's amazing. It means regular hours, she continued excitedly. Benefits. No more double shifts. They sat at their small kitchen table, the same one where they'd worried over bills just months ago. His mother had tears in her eyes. And you know what the best part is? What? I can finally take those night classes I've been dreaming about. She squeezed his hand. Seems like doing the right thing runs in the family. After dinner, Marcus changed out of his work clothes and walked to Mrs. Rodriguez's house. Her new video doorbell chimed as he approached. Just checking if you need anything, he called through the door. Such a good boy. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Always checking on an old lady. Not so old, he teased. And the doorbell's working great. Thanks to you. She opened the door. Oh, did you hear about your mother's news? Marcus grinned. Word travels fast. Good news should. Later that night, Marcus sat on his bed, looking at a photo on his phone. Someone had captured the moment he and Mr. Thompson finally got the refrigerator through the door. They were both exhausted, dirty but smiling. His new ID badge sat on his desk next to his first business cards. The leather shoes waited by the door for tomorrow. His tie hung neatly on its rack. No more clip-ons. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from James. Got the final numbers. Training program approved for all 3 locations. Well done. Marcus thought about the young clerk at the grocery store today, wearing the same apron he once wore. Sometimes life had a way of bringing things full circle. A car alarm went off somewhere in the neighborhood. A dog barked in response. The normal sounds of a normal night in a life that had become anything but normal. His mother's voice carried from the kitchen, humming as she prepared for her last week of double shifts. Soon she'd be the one in management meetings, making decisions, changing lives. Marcus looked at the photo again. 2 months ago, he'd been a kid in taped-up shoes, making a choice between walking away and stepping up. Now he was helping create opportunities for others to make that same choice. The refrigerator in their kitchen hummed softly, still old, still working hard, just like they did. But now it hummed with promise instead of worry, with possibility instead of fear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new chances to help. But that's what life was about, wasn't it? Not the big moments that changed everything, but the small choices that led to them. Marcus set his alarm for tomorrow, straightened his tie for the morning, and smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes being strong meant helping others find their strength. And sometimes, just sometimes, a stuck refrigerator could open doors you never even knew existed.